Well, good afternoon and welcome to H360 Live. My name is Dave Duplay and I'm here in the studio joined by my friend and colleague from Healthy 360, Miss Courtland Long. Well, Courtland, it's so good to see you today.
It's good to see you, Dave.
This weather we're having is crazy. One day it's warm, the next day it's freezing here in New York.
I know. I think last week we thought we were getting off scot-free with all this nice warm weather, and now.
Absolutely. Well, we had a great weekend. We attended two events, one on Saturday, Cycle for Survival, and what an event. You know, we were there with our friend Terry O'Hare, and what an inspiration. He is an esophageal cancer patient advocate, doing great work up at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and I was so honored to be there with him, supporting his team, and I really didn't realize Cycle for Survival was so big.
Oh, it's a huge event. It's always a ton of fun. And you, as I was saying to you when we were there, we should try to ride in it the next time that it comes around, because you really feel like you're part of this huge major cause. It's wonderful.
Well, you know, I am getting into cycling, so maybe by the time it rolls around again, I'll be in a little better shape and I'll be able to, you know, withstand all the activity going on. And then on Sunday, we were down in Asbury Park, New Jersey for the Epilepsy Foundation of New Jersey. The Stone Pony, what a great venue where Bruce Springsteen got his start. And, you know, what a great cause. We raised a lot of money for charity. And the kids that played in the band, the School of Rock, were really something. Oh,
yes. This event, Paint the Pony Purple, is always so much fun. There were a lot of really great bands that played, a lot of awesome guitars that got auctioned off, and so I think they made a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. I went home with a signed Willie Nelson guitar.
Yeah, you lucky guy.
Yeah, which I am looking for another charity to donate that to for an auction. So we may be talking to somebody later in the show that we can put that up for auction.
That would be great.
Absolutely. Well, we've got a great show for you today. We've got Lou-Ellen Barkan coming into the studio, and she is going to be talking to us about her new organization, CaringKind. New name, doing the same things in New York City for Alzheimer's patients, caregivers, and I can't wait to get her in here because the work that they're doing with caregivers right here in New York City and the boroughs, it's truly amazing. And she is such an inspiration to us. She's been a good friend of Healthy 360 for a number of years. And it's such an exciting time for her. Can't wait to get her in.
And it's going to be a fantastic show.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, but first, we always have our health tips. And in line with what we're going to be talking to Lou-Ellen about, we've got a couple of health tips we think are appropriate for the area of caregiving. We hope you enjoy these. I can't wait to talk to Lou-Ellen about these when she gets in here.
I know. I think these tips are going to be very helpful, and they're geared toward making life just a little bit easier for any caregiver that's helping out a patient who's living with Alzheimer's or dementia. So I think we'll just jump right in. And tip number one is to schedule wisely. So there are some times during the day where a patient with Alzheimer's can get a little agitated and tasks can be a little bit difficult. Tasks that were once very simple for someone to do can become, if not impossible, very difficult to accomplish. So you want to make sure that you're scheduling these tasks for the individual at the times during the day when they're most calm and agreeable. So some tasks that can be difficult are things like eating and bathing. So you want to make sure that maybe bathing happens a little bit earlier in the day so that the individual isn't agitated during an episode of sundowning.
Yeah, so Courtland, you speak of sundowning. Tell me what exactly that is.
So sundowning is a little bit of a phenomenon where a patient with Alzheimer's gets agitated and very bothered when the sun is setting. And I think it's because that change in the daylight kind of really causes great confusion to that individual.
Yeah, well, that's a great tip. Schedule wisely. I see that with my mother. I think it's easier for her to do things in the beginning of the day when she's kind of awake and fresh for the day, rather than in the evening. So I agree with you there. Well, the second tip is prevent falls, and this may sound a little silly, but actually, and I see this again in my mother. She's shuffling her feet now. Her step isn't as high as it used to be. She's shuffling her feet, so you really have to pay attention to the rugs that are laid down on the floor, maybe extension cords or other things that can prevent a fall. And as we get older, falls are more and more significant to us. So you really have to pay attention. Watch those rugs, the throw rugs on the floors. Pay very close attention to extension cords or cords of lamps, because those are really dangerous and can really have a fall, when that happens. And, the other thing is handrails are important too. Going upstairs, even if they're small, can be a real challenge for somebody with dementia or Alzheimer's, or just the aging. So having handrails on the stairs is really important.
Having anything scattered on the floor can be dangerous for people of any age, but like you said, using grab bars, handrails are very important, and I encourage anyone who has trouble walking to try to use a cane or a walker. Preventing falls is very important, and as you know, my grandfather actually had Alzheimer's and suffered a fall and broke his hip, and it was very difficult to recover from that.
Yeah, absolutely. So great tip, again, prevent falls, watch those rugs, watch the extension cords. And Courtland, I think we have one more.
Yes, so tip number 3 is to focus on individualized care. So every patient is going to experience the symptoms and the progression of Alzheimer's in a different way. And it's really important to tailor your caregiving to that progression and how someone is experiencing their symptoms. So remember though that your loved one's responses may not be the same as they were before they had or encountered Alzheimer's. So try not to take these responses personally if they happen to be negative.
Yeah, Courtland, Lou-Ellen said something a couple of years back when I met her that has kind of stuck with me. And she said at one of her events that if you've seen one Alzheimer's patient, you've seen one Alzheimer's patient. And it's so true. Individualized care, and CaringKind as an organization really does this exceptionally well. They don't look at the disease, they look at the individual. And they tailor the quality of care that they provide to the individual. And their staff, what is really impressive to me is their staff, they really get to know the people that walk through the doors to get help at that organization. So again, I can't wait to get her in here and talk all about that. But first, we sent the interns out in the streets of New York to Bryant Park to talk to our friendly New Yorkers about Alzheimer's, dementia, and exactly what they know or don't know about the condition. You want to watch the video?
I would love to.
Okay, guys, please roll the tape.
Do you know anyone who's living with Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah, it's actually one of my best friends. She's back in Denmark, so we're not really together like when I live here.
No.
No, I don't currently know of anyone living with Alzheimer's disease.
Yes, in a way, yes. We just had an uncle that was diagnosed.
For somebody living with Alzheimer's, how important do you think it is for them to schedule like their appointments and making sure they have a calendar and like having everything scheduled and written down for them to remember?
It's very important to maintain a peace of mind.
I think it's very important because it gives you you can have a peace in your mind, or you know when you're gonna do things, and
Exactly.
I feel like it's very important. If you don't, then their health is going to decline even more.
Well, so we've just noticed that yes, it is. He was hospitalized for a little bit, and then we let him go back home. And so he really thought that he could do it by himself. But when my mother-in-law checks up on him, he cannot be by himself. He was forgetting to take his medication.
Wow.
He was getting, I guess, delusional would be the word.
If you're caring for someone with Alzheimer's disease in the future, what safety precautions would you take to kind of, keep that person safe?
Definitely I would have them not live alone.
We kind of just take it slow. We just chill, and I don't put much pressure on her.
Okay.
Try to take them everywhere you can, be with them as much as you possibly can.
Just realizing that he couldn't be on his own. So because it's so new, I think that's mainly the safety part. Like he thought his mom was still alive, which she's not anymore. So he was asking things about
Wow.
So it's really those things, just recognizing that.
As a caregiver, how important do you think it would be in order to practice patience, with the person with Alzheimer's and taking care of them?
Oh, you have to. It's like having a newborn child. Alzheimer's is like they're reverting back to that where, they don't know what they're doing.
So definitely people need to be patient and realize that, it's not their fault this is happening to them.
my father-in-law is like not by default, but he just seems it as very like black and white. So he will just remind me, he'll be like, "Mom is dead." So we were trying to tell him like, I think maybe it might be a shock to him to hear that again. So we kind of talked to him about like trying not to answer him like in
Like
these
that,
like so direct.
It's very important. I really feel like she deserves to have a friend that she can, feel comfortable with.
Exactly.
So I use a lot of time to just do whatever she wants to do.
Well, Courtland, what do you think?
That was an excellent video. You know, some people did have experience with individuals who live with Alzheimer's and some didn't, but everybody had really great tips to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And the ones that didn't seem to be well aware.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's great because the message is getting out,
Yeah.
right? And so even though they don't have a direct affiliation, they have knowledge of it, and they had great answers.
Yeah, and I thought it was really nice that one young woman whose best friend has someone in her family with Alzheimer's is really supportive, and she says, I just don't put any pressure on her, and I'm there for her when she needs me.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's a long-distance relationship as well.
Yeah.
So being there, and that level of friendship is really important.
Yeah, it's important for anyone.
Absolutely. Well, it was a great video. Our interns did a great job. Our friendly New Yorkers were opinionated as always, came up with some really, really great answers, so we're happy about that. Well, Courtland, our favorite time of the show, our guest Lou-Ellen Barkan is in. But before we introduce Lou-Ellen and begin our question and answer section, I want to talk a little bit about Alzheimer's and dementia. And here's some statistics that are really eye-opening. An estimated 45% of American seniors 85 and older suffer from Alzheimer's, and 1 in 8 people age 65 and older, or 13%, suffer from Alzheimer's. It's the most common cause of dementia among older adults. It's a real significant issue and only getting worse. Early onset Alzheimer's can develop in people as young as 30 years old, which is an amazing number to me as well. And over 15 million Americans are unpaid caregivers for someone with Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia. And as we talk, caregiving is a really, really tough job. Well, Lou-Ellen, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
It's so good to see you again, your second appearance here, but we've got some exciting news to talk about today. So let's jump right in.
Yes, well, again, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to see you. So we've been working together for quite a few years, and it's our hope that individuals around the country will see this broadcast and model their organizations after CaringKind. And so this month begins a very exciting time for you. We have a new name, a renewed sense of energy in providing support for people who are caregiving for Alzheimer's patients. So can you share with us a little bit about how you got to this new chapter?
It's a very exciting time for us. You're absolutely right. And what's interesting about the exciting time is in some ways it's just a name change, but that name change is really a sea change in how we see ourselves and how we hope the community will experience what we do. We say now, and we've always said, that in the absence of an effective therapy, the best therapy is good care. So when we made the decision to go back to our roots as an independent local organization, we realized that the most important thing that we do is support caregivers for people who have dementia, one of the hardest jobs that there is. And that includes paid caregivers, unpaid caregivers, doctors and other medical professionals in the field. We really operate as the center of that wheel, all those stakeholders that are involved. So we thought about who we really are. We're involved with caregivers. We thought, well, we're the listening kind. We do a lot of listening. We certainly are the loving kind. As Dave said, we are always looking at the individual and not the disease. We know people are really unique. We are the caring kind. So we came up with this wonderful name, CaringKind, the heart of Alzheimer's caregiving. And that, I think, tells people what we do. We are focused on supporting caregivers for people who have Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia to make their lives easier and improve the lives of the people who are ill.
It's a laser-focused mission, and besides the three of us sitting here, our passion for helping people, my mother is an Alzheimer's sufferer. Courtland's uncle has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and you yourself have a personal story. Can you share with our audience a little bit about your story in Alzheimer's?
Absolutely. My mother was the caregiver for my father for 12 years, and I can tell you that there were 2 victims of that disease. My father's progression was very difficult, obviously, for him and for all of us watching that in the family, but my mother also declined dramatically during that period. Neither one of them were young when this started. My father died when he was 88. So they were already well into the stage of life where you would have hoped they would have had some pleasure, some period of retirement, and instead they went through this devastating problem. The real tragedy of it, we didn't know anything about any of the organizations like CaringKind that could have provided resources and help. And I'll tell you one funny story. When my dad was ill, my mother called me up to tell me that she couldn't get him out of the chair. My father was a professional athlete in his youth, and my mom was a little tiny lady, and she couldn't move him because he was too big and strong. And she tried. And so when she couldn't do that, she'd call the local police in this town they lived in Florida. And the cops would come and they would lift my father out of the chair. When she told me this story, I felt terrible about it. There must be a solution, I said. So we called a small agency in Florida, and they suggested a chair that had a little lever. And when you pushed it, the chair reached up and lifted my father out of the chair, and my mother could pull him up and put him to bed. It was a life-changing moment for her and for us. If we had known about organizations like CaringKind, so many more things like that would have been accessible to us, and it would have really changed my mother's experience, my experience, and my father's experience.
Yeah.
Well, at CaringKind, you have so many resources that are certainly life-changing to a lot of people who are affected by Alzheimer's. And we know that you have a very unique resource at CaringKind, the Early Stage Center. So can you share with us what was the inspiration behind the Early Stage Center and how it is really helpful to people who are living with Alzheimer's?
When I started this position 12 years ago, no one was talking about Alzheimer's. If you looked in the newspapers or turned on the news, there was nothing about Alzheimer's and nothing about dementia. And so we were all sort of living in this world where if somebody had a symptom, you said, well, that's just old age. Very few people got a good diagnosis, and the diagnostics were very different. Today, fast forward into 2016, we have wonderful diagnostic procedures, and we know we can tell you pretty early on in the progression of the disease that you have Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. That means that more people are becoming diagnosed earlier, and there are more out there in the world. They can't necessarily work anymore. Many of them have lost their jobs. They don't necessarily, we hope, drive once they've been diagnosed, but they are at wit's end all day looking for something to do. So what often happens is they stay home all day and watch television. Or worse yet, they sleep all day. And what happens is there's no activity, nothing to look forward to. And these are people who are really in the early stage. They're still, in many cases, capable of having some sort of reasonable life. So we created the Early Stage Center, and we have 2 purposes. One is to bring people in to have an activity that engages them, because we know that mental engagement through this period is really a wonderful form of caregiving. And then we also want the family members to be involved with our organization, because we help people through the continuum of the disease. And if we can bring the family members in early enough in the cycle, then we will have their attention throughout. And all the resources I mentioned, like the one my mother had,
Right.
that becomes accessible to them throughout. The Early Stage Center provides a place where people with early stage Alzheimer's can come in, they can have programming, they can sit with their buddies and have a newspaper read and have a cup of coffee in the morning, where they often have no place else to go. It's not a place where they hang out all day. It's a place to look forward to. And then when the disease progresses beyond the early stage, the family members are already connected to the wonderful resources that we have.
Social isolation is just not a great thing, and for anybody at any age with any condition, especially early age dementia or Alzheimer's, people have to get out, and they, as you say, they have to look forward to something. You have a great program called Connect to Culture. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, aren't we lucky to live in New York and some of the big cities of America that have these fabulous museums? And when I first started here, I thought, wow, here we are, we're only a few blocks from all these fabulous museums. What are we doing? So we had 2 ways of looking at that. One was what I call the institutional model. And we have somebody on staff whose job it is to go out to the Metropolitan Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, the Botanical Gardens, any of the institutions in New York that are focused on the cultural arts, and work with them to help train their docents and how to better provide resources in the institution itself for people with dementia, and equally important for their caregivers. Because what we want is people to come in, have that great experience, and then bring some of that knowledge back to home so they can work with the person with dementia in the home. We also have routinely brought the folks with dementia, with their caregivers, to our offices, and we've had dance programs, for example. Again, teaching the caregivers the ways to use music, use art, and use dance to work with somebody with dementia. And as Courtland mentioned earlier, it's very hard to find things to do, and very often you want to time them at the right time of the day. But when you have that resource, that asset, it's so important. And it gives the caregiver a sense that they're really doing something, bringing some joy back into both of those lives.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we certainly are lucky to live in New York, one of the most diverse countries in the world. And CaringKind has a really incredible diversity outreach and inclusion efforts. So how has this really helped you to extend your services to more ethnically diverse populations?
That's the other side of exactly the same story, and as you picked it up, beautifully. This is one of those times where I tell you that my mother was wrong and anthropology was a good major. Because I was grateful that I had an anthropology background when I started in this position, recognizing that the cultural and language differences that the population of our group, of our citizens have, really makes a difference. And so we decided early on that we would figure out a way to teach people what they needed to know in their own language. So to that end, we have very robust programs in Spanish for the Latino population, which in and of itself is very diverse, for the Chinese population, for the Russian population. We're working in the Orthodox Jewish community, and we have a woman focused on the African American population in New York. And you would be astonished, as I was, and interested in how differently we approach each of these groups. New York is a melting pot of sorts, but truly we all sort of, in some ways, need to hear the words in ways that speak to us. And we want people to have these resources, and it's been enormously helpful.
Yeah. So, Lou-Ellen, let's shift gears for just a minute. Technology is changing our world. It's changing the way that we live, the way that we work, the way that we communicate with family and friends, but it's also changing the way that we get services around health and wellness. And I'm interested to hear, what you think about technology and how that can support CaringKind and your efforts.
Technology is something we talk about all the time. I think all of us talk about it all the time. I look at my iWatch and I pull out my iPhone and I'm on my PC or whatever all day long. And we all like social media. We think it's a great resource. And clearly we have a wonderful paper newsletter still, because I know there's a population of people that like to carry that around, my mom being one of those. And we also have an e-news version and a web-based version. That's the easy stuff. But then the question becomes, what else can we provide that would really make a difference? And we've had two wonderful resources. One is really in the market now, and one will be coming up shortly. Some time ago, I heard about Match.com, which we all know about, right? And I realized that with Match.com, we had an opportunity to use that model, and we've created something called Together We Care. So at CaringKind, we have a wonderful home care worker training program to train aides, many of whom have years of experience, but no specific experience with dementia. So we educate them on the issues around dementia, similar in many ways to the tips you gave earlier. And these paid aides then would go out into the marketplace and look for jobs. I discovered early on that even though the families were calling us desperate for aides, and even though the aides were trained in looking for jobs, it sometimes took 6 months for an aide to find a job. What I call the most inefficient market in America. So I said, we can fix that. So we've now created a site where the aides can, after they're trained, they can create a web-based resume, post it on the site, and then at the same time, families coming in can put a job description in, and the aides and the families can make a match. And they do it on their own. We don't intervene in the interaction, but the resource is there for them. And it really is a sea change in making both the aides more responsible to get the right job and also make it happen faster.
Yeah.
It's a terrific resource. The second thing we're developing is something called the Balance app, an app which you'll have on your smartphone. And if you were, by example, Dave, taking care of your mom, and say you had 3 or 4 brothers or sisters, your mom might have an aide at home, there obviously would be a physician involved at some point, maybe a case manager, and all of them doing different things for mom at different times of each day. Each one of you would go into the app and you would say, by example, I stopped by today and gave mom her lunch. So when your sister came by at 4 o'clock to see how things were going and give mom her medication, she would know, did mom have lunch? Oh, yeah, mom had lunch. Look, Dave stopped by and gave mom lunch. Your sister would give the medicine, stop by. At the end of the day, there's sundowning. She might write a note and say, Mom seems a little agitated. So when he turns the case over to the aide can do the same thing. It's a way of keeping families all together and engaged and knowledgeable about what's really going on. And again, using technology to make everybody's job easier.
Yep.
There are so many great technologies that you have and coming out, but you also have a 24-hour helpline at CaringKind. So how is this proven to be a useful resource to caregivers, and how can it be reached?
The most important thing that people can do, absolutely, is to call our helpline. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we do have a translation services, so we're translating into about 180 different languages. We have the number, just in case anyone needs it, is 646-744-2900, and a real live human being will pick up that phone. And these are social workers and people trained in the field who really can take the time to understand that each family is different, as you said earlier, each case is unique, and hear what the stage is that the individual is in. Do they need a diagnosis? Do they need a nursing home referral? And then our usual business model is that we try to teach people to fish. We don't give them the fish. So if someone's looking for a nursing home, we would give them, for example, 10 questions to ask and the names of 3 homes that for a variety of reasons seemed appropriate. We would then send them out to the field themselves with their family members. And then they would call us back and say they visited all 3 homes. The one they liked was the following. And here are the kind of responses they got to the question. If people are worrying about the financial and legal issues, we'll do the same thing. We have lots and lots of elder lawyers, and we'll give out 3 names, and we'll ask the individual to go out with the sort of questions and make it work. But the helpline is the access point for every single individual with a problem. And I have never received a call myself or heard of one where the last thing someone says after that first call is, I'm so glad I made that call. What took me so long? I should have made this call 6 months ago, 2 years ago. If only I had done that, it would have changed my life.
Right. You know, we hear that all the time. Now, along with your new name, I'm happy to announce our new partnership, where we're going to be working together to support the people of New York City, the caregivers and patients, in more of a social media aspect with our platform, where patients can connect with your organization, they can connect with each other, they can share stories. You know, we find that, you know, at Healthy h360, we call it virtual social therapy, and we see that that's so important, and with technology, it's going to be increasingly more important. Tell us your thoughts around social media and the bringing together in kind of a web-based platform. How do you see that?
Let me start by saying that the hardest problem that caregivers have is guilt and taking care of themselves. It is really impossible for them to spend time there. My mother was terrified to leave the house, to have lunch with me, for example. So what we try to tell caregivers is it's sort of like being on a plane. Before you can take care of yourself, your child, you have to put your own oxygen mask on, right? So we want caregivers to have many resources and options for resources to help them reach out, to communicate, to stay involved, to stay engaged, because that is equally important for the caregiver as it is for the individual.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's hard to get out of the house. It's hard in the middle of the winter, you know, in cities where the weather is bad, to get out in the middle of the day and go to a support group. But having the great thing about technology and social media as you provide it is that access is there. And if I want to ask a question, I don't have to wait. I can ask the question. There's something about just asking the question, about seeing what other people are doing, about hearing other people's questions, that's really therapeutic in its own way.
Yeah.
So we are so excited to be working with you and to provide that resource for our caregivers as well. And we will be looking forward, I think, over time, that there'll be some wonderful things we can learn from the information that we get from people who are connected to Healthy h360.
Yeah.
Well, in addition to this partnership, you know, we know that on CaringKind you also compile a lot of information about clinical trials. And so with our partnership, you're going to be able to push a lot of that information out to the community and really try to get more people involved in these clinical trials. And we know it's so important to have patients and caregivers involved to get these medications out in the market, and they're going to be really beneficial to patients. So, you know, how are you seeing this as a way to expand participation in clinical trials?
It's a clinical trial. I mean, we live in a country where, unfortunately, you know, the medical system is cautious And as an outcome of that, the way that medical research is done here is also cautious. And so medications go through, as I'm sure you know, sort of phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trials. Particularly in phase 2 and 3, human subjects are required. So now picture yourself in the following situation. It's February in New York. All the streets are icy, and you need to get mom to the test site so that she can consistently participate in the clinical trial. And if she doesn't do that, then her research that she's been involved with will absolutely fail, and she won't be able to participate. And she's 85 years old. And it's terrible, freezing cold day, and you as a caregiver are absolutely exhausted and have 50,000 things to do. I can guarantee you that this falls to the bottom of the list. In order for us to have enough clinical trial subjects who will consistently, reliably participate, we have to have a much larger sample than many other disease categories, because these are people who need someone to take them, and they need the caregiver and the individual who's ill to participate. We don't have doctors running around doing this at the home site. It's extremely hard to do. The more people who know about it, the better off we are. The absence of clinical trial subjects means we'll never get a therapy. It's not just about money. It's also about participation, and anything, including what we're doing with you, will really help us get that word out. When people ask me what can they do to help move research along, the first thing I say is exactly that, is we need more people in trials.
Yeah. Lou-Ellen, we have a question that came in from one of our viewers, Greg in New Jersey, and he says that he has a family member who suffers from Alzheimer's disease. And he wants to know if you have any advice on how he can communicate to that person. I think he feels a little bit like he's talking like a child or talking down, and he's not really sure if that's how he should be communicating. Do you have any advice for that?
Well, he's probably not entirely in the wrong place. You know, there is lots of caregivers call us and they do it entirely the wrong way. So just as an example, the other side of this is someone they're always arguing with someone. So someone says, you know, the sun is shining today, says the person with Alzheimer's. No, Mom, it's raining out, can't you see? You know, and you'd be surprised how much of our childhood we bring to that communication, particularly with parents, that a lot of those patterns are still in existence. So it sounds like Greg's already in somewhat the right place. He's moved himself into the mind of the person he's talking to.
Yeah.
And I think that's the first piece of advice. Without knowing more, it would be hard for me to give him more specific advice. But moving yourself into the mind of the person you are talking to and living that reality, that's the very first step. So my mother once said to me when I was with her, she said, you know, I was giving her some direction about something and I was trying to be pleasant, and she said, you have no right to give me instructions. Who are you? And my first reaction was to argue with her, of course, you know, and I sort of stepped back for a bit and I didn't say anything. And finally I turned to her and I said, well, Mom, why can't I be your daughter? You know, why can't I be your daughter? And she said, because my daughter is attractive and professional, and look at you. And I was one of those days when I was completely exhausted, and I realized that my mother in her mind had an entirely different person as her daughter. Mm-hmm. And I had to sort of step back for a minute and have a conversation with somebody who was really experiencing the world in a different way. So the only advice I would give him is that, yeah, it sounds like a child to him, but not to his mother. He's doing the right thing.
Yeah, great point, Greg. Thanks for that question. We're almost out of time. Lou-Ellen, I want to touch on one thing, and we've touched briefly on it today, and that's caregiving. And what a job. I mean, you're so right that the caregiving is one of the toughest jobs there is. What advice do you have? I know there's respite, and I think you hit on it when you said, you know, you got to put your mask on first and take care of yourself. But what are some of the things that caregivers out there that are really starting to feel overwhelmed? What can they do?
There are three things that are really important. One is call that helpline number, because we have wonderful resources and advice from people who really are professionals. The second is it's hard to say it just to say it, but it's true, you know, you're really not alone. So once you get on the Healthy h360 site and you see other people who are experiencing the same thing, once you make that helpline call and you know that, that's great. But there are some basics, the same things we do for other people. Caregivers need to take some time off, to get a break if possible. They need to eat properly. They need to get enough sleep. These are things that are really challenging when you're taking care of somebody who needs 24-hour supervision. Not just you really have to watch them all the time. Make sure you have all the resources that you need in the house. People aren't wandering. We have a wonderful program, very low-tech, user-friendly bracelet program that people wear when they have dementia. So if they wander, and they almost always do, they can be safely found. if you have that bracelet as a caregiver, you can take a deep breath so that if someone leaves the house for a moment, they won't get lost quite the same way. So like my advice would be take care of yourself. Don't feel guilty. You know this is the hardest job in the world. And make sure that you have information, much of which CaringKind can give people by calling that helpline number, about all the resources that are really out there.
Yeah. Well, Lou-Ellen, thanks for stopping in. I admire you and your organization. CaringKind certainly is a cut above the rest, and I'm so happy to be your partner.
Thank you very much, Dave. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Courtland.
Thank you. I'd like to thank our viewers for tuning in, and as always, I'd like to thank our sponsors for making it all possible. Remember, all of our episodes can be viewed on demand at healthyo360.com, and our podcast can be found in the iTunes Store. Well, we really like social media, and Courtland's going to share some of our efforts there.
We're all over Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest. We use the hashtag #RealStories when posting, and we'd greatly appreciate it if you would do the same. On behalf of Dave Duplay, myself, and the entire Healthyo360 family, we'd like to thank you for joining us today. And sit right there. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and talk with Dr. Friedhoff from Axovant Sciences.